When 34-year-old single mother Jessica Miller stepped into her late grandfather's abandoned workshop for the first time in 15 years, the scent of sawdust and machine oil transported her back to childhood memories. But as the beam of her flashlight swept across the cluttered space, revealing the weathered workbenches and dust-covered tools, she couldn't have imagined that beneath this forgotten corner of rural Nebraska lay the answer to her family's desperate financial situation, a revolutionary invention worth billions, hidden away by a humble man who never sought fame or fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The December wind howled through the gaps in the workshop's wooden slats as Jessica pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her slender frame. The temperature had plummeted to 17 degrees, but she couldn't afford to run the heating in the main farmhouse, let alone out here. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she surveyed what remained of her inheritance, 40 acres of struggling farmland, a century-old farmhouse with a leaking roof, and this dilapidated workshop where her grandfather, Arthur Miller, had spent most of his waking hours for over 50 years. 3 months ago, Jessica had been living a modest but stable life in Omaha with her 6-year-old daughter Emma and 4-year-old son Liam. She'd built a small custom furniture business that provided just enough income to keep their tiny apartment and pay for childcare while she worked. Then came the accident that took her husband Michael's life, a factory malfunction that left her alone with 2 grieving children, mounting medical bills, and a legal battle with the company that had consumed what little savings they had. The letter from her landlord had arrived yesterday, an eviction notice giving her 14 days to vacate the apartment. The same day, the electricity company had threatened disconnection if she couldn't come up with $1,200 by the end of the week. Jessica had exhausted every option, loans denied, credit cards maxed, and friends whose generosity had reached its limits. That's when she remembered the workshop. Her grandfather had died last spring, leaving her the farm where she'd spent her childhood summers. She'd kept it listed for sale, but in this economy and with the property's condition, there had been no serious offers. Now it seemed less like a burden and more like her family's last chance. "Mom, can I come in?" Emma's voice pulled Jessica from her thoughts. Her daughter stood in the doorway, her small form silhouetted against the gray winter light, copper hair spilling from beneath a knitted hat that had once been Jessica's own. "Honey, it's too cold in here," Jessica said, wiping dust from her hands onto worn jeans. "Why don't you go back to the house and finish unpacking?" "I'll be there soon." "But I want to help," Emma insisted, taking a tentative step inside. "Grandpa used to let me help him all the time." Jessica's heart constricted at the memory. Arthur Miller had taught her everything she knew about woodworking, skills that had later become her livelihood. While the world knew him only as a reclusive farmer who occasionally sold handcrafted furniture at local markets, to Jessica he had been a master craftsman, a patient teacher, and the steady presence she had desperately needed after her parents' deaths when she was just 12. "All right," Jessica conceded, "but stay close. This place is falling apart." As Emma entered, her small boots crunching on debris, Jessica continued examining the workbenches. Most of the valuable tools had been sold years ago when her grandfather's health began failing and medical bills mounted. What remained were rusted hand tools, half-finished projects, and decades of accumulated dust. Jessica had hoped to find something, anything, she could sell to buy them a few more days. But the reality of the workshop's condition was crushing that hope with every passing minute. "Mom, what's this?" Emma was pointing to a faded photograph pinned to the wall behind stacks of yellowed technical journals. Jessica carefully moved the journals aside, revealing a black and white image of her grandfather standing beside a tall, distinguished man in a suit. Between them was what looked like a complex mechanical device. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica gently removed the thumbtack and brought the photograph closer to the light streaming through the grimy window. She recognized her grandfather, much younger than she'd ever known him, perhaps in his 30s. The date scrawled on the back read August 17, 1978. The other man was unfamiliar, but something about his bearing suggested importance. What captured Jessica's attention, however, was the device they stood beside, an intricate arrangement of gears, pistons, and what appeared to be a specialized turbine. "I don't know, sweetie," Jessica murmured, tucking the photograph into her pocket. "But I'm going to find out." By late afternoon, Jessica had made disappointing progress. She'd found nothing of significant value, just piles of old technical journals, boxes of mechanical components, and notebooks filled with her grandfather's meticulous handwriting. As the early winter darkness descended, she decided to call it a day. "Mom, look at this," Emma called from a corner she'd been exploring. Jessica turned to find her daughter tugging at what appeared to be an ordinary section of wall paneling. "It sounds different when I knock on it. Like it's hollow." Jessica crossed the workshop, mindful of the uneven floorboards. She knelt beside her daughter and rapped her knuckles against the panel. Emma was right, it produced a distinctly hollow sound, different from the solid thunk of the surrounding wall. "Stand back, honey," Jessica instructed, examining the panel more closely. After a moment's inspection, she noticed a nearly invisible seam running around its perimeter. She slid her fingers along the edge until she felt a slight depression. When she pressed it, there was a soft click, and the panel popped forward slightly. Jessica's heart raced as she carefully pulled the panel away, revealing a recessed compartment built into the wall. Inside was a metal lockbox, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust. With trembling hands, she lifted it out and placed it on the nearest workbench. "What's inside?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide with excitement. "I don't know," Jessica replied, examining the box. There was no keyhole, only a combination dial set into the front. "But I think I know the combination." Her grandfather had used the same sequence of numbers for everything: August 14th, 53, his wedding anniversary. Jessica rotated the dial, and sure enough, the lockbox opened with a satisfying click. Inside were several items: a leather-bound journal with proprietary Arthur Miller embossed on the cover, a USB drive that looked surprisingly modern compared to the aged box, a folder containing what appeared to be technical drawings, and a small velvet pouch. Jessica opened the pouch first, emptying its contents onto her palm, a small brass key with an unusual serrated edge. She set it aside and opened the journal, finding page after page of dense technical notes, calculations, and detailed sketches. The handwriting was unmistakably her grandfather's, but the content was far beyond the simple furniture designs she remembered him working on. "Mom, it's getting really cold," Emma said, her teeth beginning to chatter. "Can we go back to the house?" "Of course," Jessica replied, closing the journal. She gathered the items from the lockbox and tucked them into her coat. "Let's get you warmed up." Back in the farmhouse, Jessica settled Emma and Liam in front of the wood stove with hot chocolate and their favorite cartoon on the tablet, one of the few luxuries she'd kept from their previous life. The children's bedroom was the only one she'd managed to properly heat since their arrival yesterday. Her own sleeping bag lay unfurled on the living room floor, positioned to catch what warmth the old wood stove provided. After the children were asleep, Jessica spread the contents of the lockbox across the kitchen table. She began with the technical drawings, which revealed detailed schematics for what appeared to be some kind of energy generation device. The designs were labeled Miller Atmospheric Energy Converter and dated from the late 1970s through the early 2000s, showing the evolution of the invention over decades. The journal contained her grandfather's private thoughts and technical notes spanning over 30 years. As Jessica flipped through the pages, a narrative began to emerge, one that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the quiet, humble man who had raised her. Arthur Miller, it seemed, had not been just a farmer and woodworker. He had been an unrecognized genius who had developed a revolutionary method for harvesting electrical energy directly from atmospheric pressure differentials, essentially generating clean electricity from air, with minimal moving parts and no fossil fuel requirements. Jessica's hands trembled as she read entry after entry. The technical details were beyond her comprehension, but the implications were clear. This was potentially world-changing technology. But why had he hidden it away? The answer came in entries from 1980, after her grandfather had apparently attempted to patent his invention. According to his journal, he had been approached by representatives from Westridge Energy Corporation, a powerful energy conglomerate. They had offered to buy his patent application and research for what seemed like a substantial sum at the time, $150,000. When Arthur refused, believing his invention could help people beyond simply making him wealthy, the company's approach changed. The journal documented increasing pressure, veiled threats, and finally, a devastating fire in his original workshop that destroyed many of his prototypes and nearly killed him. The official investigation had ruled it an accident, but Arthur's journal left no doubt about what he believed. After the fire, Arthur had made a strategic decision. He wrote, "I will appear to abandon my work. I will be the simple farmer and woodworker they expect. But I will continue in secret, perfect my design, and ensure that when the time is right, it will reach those who will use it for the good of humanity, not just profit." Jessica sat back, her mind reeling. Her grandfather, the man who had taught her to appreciate simple living and honest work, had been harboring a secret that could potentially revolutionize energy production worldwide. The USB drive proved to be the most valuable piece. When Jessica plugged it into her laptop, she found thousands of files, refined schematics, test results, video demonstrations of working prototypes, and most importantly, complete patent applications that had never been filed, updated as recently as 3 months before her grandfather's death. There was also a video file labeled "For Jessica." With shaking hands, she clicked on it. Her grandfather's face filled the screen, thinner than she remembered, with oxygen tubes in his nose, clearly recorded during his final illness. Despite his condition, his eyes held the same kindness and intelligence she remembered. "Jessica," he began, his voice raspy but strong. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you found my life's work. I've always known you were the one who would understand what to do with it." Arthur explained that he had continued developing his atmospheric energy converter in secret for decades, perfecting it far beyond his original design. The technology was now capable of providing clean, nearly free electricity at a scale that could power everything from individual homes to entire cities, with minimal environmental impact. "I never filed the final patents because I knew what would happen," he continued. "The energy companies would bury it, just like they tried to bury me. But the world is different now. People are ready for change, and you, my dear Jessica, have the strength to make sure this reaches the right hands." He explained that he had established a trust with a law firm in Lincoln, Patterson and Mercer, with instructions to assist her when she discovered his research. The trust contained funds for patent filing and legal protection, along with connections to ethical engineers and manufacturers who could help bring the technology to market. "The brass key you found will open a hidden compartment beneath the workshop floor," Arthur continued. "There, you'll find 3 working prototypes and all my original research materials. The largest prototype can power the entire farm. I've been using it for years. Why do you think my electricity bills were so low?" He chuckled, then grew serious again. "This technology belongs to humanity, Jessica. Not to corporations, not to governments. I'm trusting you to protect it, share it wisely, and use it to take care of our family and help others. You've always had my creativity and your grandmother's backbone. You'll know what to do." The video ended with her grandfather's weathered hand reaching toward the camera, as if trying to bridge the distance between them one last time. Jessica sat motionless at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. She had come to the farm seeking temporary shelter, perhaps a few items to sell for quick cash. Instead, she had discovered her grandfather's legacy, a gift that could change not only her family's future but potentially the world's relationship with energy. As the implications settled over her, Jessica became aware of a sound outside, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. She moved to the window and peered out to see headlights cutting through the darkness. A black SUV was pulling up to the farmhouse, its windows tinted, revealing nothing about who might be inside. Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly gathered the journal, schematics, and USB drive, shoving them into a kitchen drawer beneath some dishcloths. Who would visit this remote farmhouse after dark? How did they even know anyone was here? A memory from her grandfather's journal flashed through her mind: they've never stopped watching. Even now, Decades later, I sometimes see unfamiliar vehicles parked along the county road, or notice signs that someone has been on the property when I was away. The car doors opened, and two figures emerged, a tall man in an expensive-looking overcoat and a woman in a business suit, both moving with the confident purpose of people accustomed to getting what they wanted. As they approached the porch, Jessica could see their faces clearly in the security light. The man was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that seemed vaguely familiar. With a jolt, Jessica realized where she had seen him before. He was a younger version of the man standing beside her grandfather in the photograph she had found earlier that day. Jessica checked on her sleeping children, then took a deep breath and moved toward the door. Her grandfather had spent decades protecting his invention. Now it was her turn to decide what happened next. Jessica braced herself at the door, her grandfather's warnings echoing in her mind as she watched the two strangers approach through the frosted glass. Her hand hovered over her phone, ready to dial 911 if necessary. After taking a deep breath, she opened the door just enough to speak through the gap, leaving the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. The silver-haired man smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Miller? Jessica Miller?" His voice carried the polished tone of corporate boardrooms. "I'm Richard Westridge, CEO of Westridge Energy. This is my colleague, Dr. Elaine Foster. We apologize for the late visit, but we've been trying to reach you since you arrived at the property." Jessica's grip tightened on the doorframe. Westridge, the same company name from her grandfather's journal. The company that had threatened him decades ago. "It's nearly 9 o'clock, she replied. "Whatever this is about can wait until business hours." Dr. Foster stepped forward. Unlike her companion, there was nothing artificial about her demeanor, just cool efficiency. "Ms. Miller, we understand your grandfather, Arthur Miller, passed away recently. We're here to discuss some unfinished business regarding certain research he conducted years ago, research that legally belongs to Westridge Energy." Jessica's heart pounded against her ribs. They knew. Somehow, they already knew she had found something. "My grandfather was a farmer and woodworker," she said carefully. "I'm not aware of any business he had with energy companies." Richard Westridge's smile thinned. "Your grandfather was far more than that, Ms. Miller. He was a brilliant engineer who developed promising technology while under contract with our company in the 1970s. When we recently learned of his passing, we naturally wanted to ensure any proprietary materials were returned to their rightful owner." At 9 o'clock at night? In the middle of a Nebraska winter? Jessica didn't bother hiding her suspicion. "We've been monitoring the property," Dr. Foster admitted with surprising candor. "When we saw lights in the workshop today, we realized someone had finally arrived. The material we're discussing is valuable enough to justify the unusual timing." Jessica's mind raced. They'd been watching the property. Waiting. Just as her grandfather had written. "I have 2 small children sleeping inside," she said firmly. "I'm not discussing anything tonight. If you have legitimate business claims, you can contact me through proper channels. Now please leave before I call the sheriff." Richard Westridge's pleasant facade faltered momentarily, revealing something harder beneath. "Of course, Ms. Miller. We respect your position." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a business card. "Please call my direct line tomorrow. I believe we can reach an arrangement that would be extremely beneficial for you and your children." Jessica took the card without a word and closed the door. Through the window, she watched them return to their vehicle, noticing how Dr. Foster paused to survey the workshop before getting into the SUV. Only when their taillights disappeared down the long driveway did she allow herself to exhale. She moved quickly through the house, checking on Emma and Liam, who mercifully remained asleep, unaware of the potential storm gathering around them. In the kitchen, Jessica retrieved the materials from the drawer and spread them across the table again, this time with new urgency. The USB drive contained thousands of files organized with her grandfather's meticulous attention to detail. Jessica clicked through folders labeled prototype designs, test results, and patent materials. She wasn't an engineer, but she recognized enough to understand that these documents represented decades of work on a revolutionary energy system. One video file showed a working prototype powering an entire barn. The camera panned to show her grandfather's face, beaming with quiet pride as he explained how his atmospheric energy converter was generating clean electricity using nothing but the natural temperature and pressure differentials in the air. No fuel, no emissions, minimal moving parts, just free, abundant energy. As Jessica continued exploring the files, she found a folder labeled Westridge. It contained scanned copies of letters, legal documents, and meeting notes dating back to 1978. The correspondence confirmed everything her grandfather had written in his journal. Westridge Energy had initially approached him with interest in his technology, but when they realized its disruptive potential, their strategy had shifted from acquisition to suppression. The most disturbing document was dated August 1980, a confidential internal memo that her grandfather must have obtained somehow. It read, "Miller's atmospheric energy technology represents a potential Category 1 threat to core business operations. Independent analysis confirms his prototype achieves 87% efficiency using atmospheric pressure differential. If scaled, this would render conventional energy production economically obsolete. Recommend immediate acquisition of all IP rights with binding non-compete and confidentiality provisions. If acquisition fails, implement Operation Blackout protocols." Jessica's blood ran cold. She didn't need to guess what Operation Blackout entailed. The fire that had nearly killed her grandfather was documented in the following pages. A sound outside pulled her attention away from the screen, a branch snapping in the cold. She moved to the window and peered into the darkness. Nothing visible, but the sense of being watched had suddenly intensified. Jessica knew she needed help, legal help, technical help, and possibly protection. Her grandfather's video had mentioned a law firm in Lincoln, Patterson and Mercer. She needed to reach them, but first, she needed to secure the prototypes her grandfather had mentioned. The hidden compartment beneath the workshop floor, that's where he said they would be. Jessica checked the time, 10:17 p.m. The temperature outside had dropped well below freezing, but she couldn't risk waiting until morning. If Westridge representatives were watching the property, they might try to access the workshop themselves overnight. She pulled on her coat and boots, tucked the USB drive and key into her pocket, and quietly slipped out the back door of the farmhouse. The night air bit at her exposed skin as she crossed the yard to the workshop, moving as silently as possible. Inside, Jessica used only her phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid being visible from outside. She methodically searched the floor, tapping and listening for hollow spaces. Near the main workbench, her knuckles produced a different sound, a subtle change that might go unnoticed if you weren't specifically looking for it. Jessica examined the area more closely and found an almost imperceptible seam in the floorboards. When she pressed on one end, the opposite edge lifted slightly, revealing a recessed metal handle. She pulled, and a trapdoor opened with surprising ease, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The brass key from the lockbox fit perfectly into a door at the bottom of the stairs. Jessica's hands trembled as she turned it, hearing the click of an old mechanism disengaging. The door swung open, and she stepped into what could only be described as a miniature laboratory. Unlike the workshop above, this hidden room was pristine, climate-controlled, and appeared to have been actively used until recently. Fluorescent lights flickered on automatically as she entered, illuminating workbenches lined with specialized tools, measurement devices, and what appeared to be 3 different versions of the same invention, the atmospheric energy converter from her grandfather's designs. The largest device, roughly the size of a small refrigerator, hummed quietly in the corner, connected to what looked like the workshop's main power system. A handwritten note taped to it read, "Mark 7, final version, complete October 2023. Just 3 months before he died, her grandfather had finished his life's work. Jessica circled the device in awe. This unassuming machine, if it worked as the documentation claimed, could power multiple homes without fuel or significant maintenance. It was worth millions, possibly billions, if it could be mass-produced. A leather-bound notebook on the main workbench caught her attention. Unlike the technical journals above, this appeared to be a personal diary. Jessica opened it to the most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks before her grandfather's death. Jessica will find this when the time is right. I've arranged everything through Patterson. The trust is funded, the patents are prepared. All she needs to do is call them and follow their guidance. Westridge is watching again. Their new CEO is William's son, but he's cut from the same cloth. They suspect I've completed the work. I should have years left to fight this battle, but my body has other plans. I hope Jessica forgives me for keeping this burden for her, but I've always known she has the strength her mother and father lacked. This technology belongs to the world, not to those who would bury it for profit. A surge of emotion caught Jessica by surprise, grief, pride, and a crushing sense of responsibility. Her grandfather had trusted her with his legacy, believing in her when she barely believed in herself anymore. The sound of a vehicle engine cut through her thoughts. Someone had pulled up outside the workshop. Jessica quickly gathered the notebook, along with a small external hard drive labeled Complete Technical Specifications that sat beside it. She switched off the lights and closed the hidden door behind her, making sure it sealed properly before ascending the stairs and carefully lowering the trapdoor back into place. Through a gap in the workshop's weathered planks, she could see headlights. The black SUV had returned. Dr. Foster emerged alone, her breath visible in the cold night air as she approached the workshop door. Jessica ducked behind a stack of lumber, heart pounding. The door handle rattled, then stopped. After a moment, the sound of a key turning in the lock froze Jessica's blood. They had a key to her grandfather's workshop. The door swung open, and Dr. Foster stepped inside, switching on a powerful flashlight. Its beam swept across the workshop methodically, coming dangerously close to Jessica's hiding place before moving on. Dr. Foster moved with purpose, examining the workbenches and storage areas. When she reached the wall panel that had concealed the lockbox, she paused, running her fingers along the seam Jessica had discovered earlier. With practiced movements, she pressed the hidden catch and opened the panel. Finding the space empty, Dr. Foster whispered something into what must have been a communication device. She then began a more thorough examination of the workshop, testing floorboards and wall panels systematically. Jessica remained motionless, barely daring to breathe, as the woman worked her way closer to the hidden trapdoor. Just as Dr. Foster approached the critical area, a sharp ring cut through the silence. Her phone. She answered it with obvious irritation. "Foster here." A pause. "Yes, someone's definitely been here." "No, nothing in the usual hiding place." "I need more time to..." Another pause. "Understood. I'll continue surveillance from the perimeter." She ended the call with visible frustration and, after one final sweep with her flashlight, exited the workshop, locking the door behind her. Jessica waited several agonizing minutes before moving from her hiding place. She needed to get back to the house without being seen. Using her phone, she texted her neighbor back in Omaha, Diane, who had been checking on their apartment. "Need urgent help. Can you call me in 2 minutes? Make it sound like an emergency." Almost exactly 2 minutes later, her phone rang loudly. Jessica answered immediately. "Hello? Yes, this is Jessica Miller." She raised her voice, making sure it would be audible outside. "What? The apartment flooded? I need to come right away." She continued the fake conversation as she exited the workshop, making sure to lock it behind her. Walking briskly toward the house, phone still to her ear, she scanned the darkness for any sign of Dr. Foster or the SUV. Nothing visible, but she felt eyes tracking her movement. "Yes, I understand. I'll leave first thing in the morning," she said loudly before ending the call. Inside the farmhouse, Jessica moved quickly, gathering essentials and checking on her still sleeping children. She needed to get to Lincoln, to Patterson and Mercer law firm, as soon as possible. But first, she needed to make it through the night. Jessica barely slept, keeping watch by the window, the USB drive and hard drive secured in a zippered pocket inside her shirt. She'd hidden her grandfather's notebooks beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry, somewhere even a thorough search might miss. At first light, she woke Emma and Liam, telling them they were going on an adventure to the big city. As she loaded their meager belongings into her old Honda, she spotted the black SUV parked just beyond the property line on the county road. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore. Just as she was strapping Liam into his car seat, another vehicle approached, a mud-splattered pickup truck that looked as weathered as the surrounding landscape. It pulled into the driveway, and a man about her age stepped out, his face partially obscured by a worn Cornhusker's cap. "Jessica Miller," he called, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Ethan Calloway. I farm the section just north of here. Your grandfather asked me to watch the place until you arrived." Jessica tensed, positioning herself between the stranger and her children. "My grandfather never mentioned any neighbors." The man nodded as if he'd expected her suspicion. "That sounds like Arthur. Man could keep a secret better than anyone I've ever known." He gestured toward the black SUV. "Those folks been parked there since yesterday afternoon." "Friends of yours?" "Not exactly," Jessica replied, studying him carefully. "You knew my grandfather well?" "He saved my farm 5 years back when the banks were calling in loans after the floods. Never asked for anything in return except that I keep an eye on his place if anything happened to him." Ethan reached into his pocket and produced an envelope. "He gave me this about a month before he passed. Said to give it to you once you'd been here at least one full day, not before." Jessica hesitantly took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in her grandfather's distinctive script. "Jessica, if you're reading this, you've found what I left for you, and you've likely also met our unwelcome friends from Westridge. Ethan Calloway is one of the few people I've trusted with parts of my work. He has a background in electrical engineering before he returned to farming. His father worked with me in the early days. You can trust him, and you'll need his help to get to Patterson and Mercer safely. There's more than one way off this property that doesn't involve the main road. Love, Grandpa Arthur." Jessica looked up from the note to find Ethan watching her with patient understanding. "You found his workshop," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "In the room below it?" Jessica hesitated, then nodded. Ethan glanced toward the county road. "Those folks from Westridge aren't just going to let you drive away with what Arthur built. They've been searching for it for decades. Why should I trust you?" Jessica asked, still protecting her children. "Because Arthur Miller was the most brilliant man I ever knew, and he chose you to carry this forward," Ethan replied simply. "And because I've got a back way off this property that they don't know about. Used to be an old cattle trail that connects to County Road 27. It'll get you to the highway without passing their surveillance." Jessica weighed her options quickly. The black SUV represented a company that had already demonstrated its willingness to use violence to protect its interests. Ethan Calloway was an unknown factor, but he had her grandfather's explicit trust. "We'll follow you," she decided. "But I'm keeping my distance and my phone ready to call for help." Ethan nodded, respecting her caution. "Smart. Arthur said you had good instincts." He glanced at her packed car. "You've got his materials?" "Some of them. Not the prototypes." "Good. Those would be hard to explain if you got pulled over." He moved toward his truck. "Follow me around back of the barn. There's an old maintenance road that's barely visible unless you know it's there. Once we hit the county road, it's a straight shot to Highway 81. As Jessica followed Ethan's truck across the property, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw the black SUV suddenly spring to life, pulling onto the main drive toward the house. "They're coming," Emma said from the back seat, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's okay," Jessica assured her, though her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We're going to be fine." Ethan's truck disappeared behind the old barn, and Jessica followed, heart pounding. A narrow trail, barely visible beneath winter-dead grass, wound between two ancient cottonwoods and down a slight incline. The trail looked impassable for vehicles, but Ethan's truck navigated it with the confidence of familiarity. Jessica followed, her Honda protesting the rough terrain. Through the trees, she could see the black SUV reaching the farmhouse, two figures quickly exiting and moving toward the workshop. The trail descended into a shallow ravine that had been invisible from the main property, then wound along a frozen creek bed before eventually connecting with what appeared to be a rarely used farm road. 20 minutes of tense driving later, they emerged onto a paved county road with no sign of pursuit. Ethan pulled over and waited for Jessica to stop alongside him. "They'll figure out we're gone soon enough," he said through his open window. "We need to get to Lincoln before they can intercept us." "You're coming with me?" Jessica hadn't expected that. "Arthur asked me to help you get his work where it needs to go." I promised him I would. He hesitated, then added, "Besides, I probably know more about his converter than anyone except Arthur himself. I helped him test the Mark VI prototype 2 years ago." Jessica studied him, this stranger who had apparently been part of her grandfather's secret world. There was something solid about him, reminiscent of Arthur himself, straightforward and unassuming, but with an intelligence that showed in his eyes. "Lincoln is 2 hours away," she said finally. "My kids need breakfast, and I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into." Ethan nodded. "There's a diner in Milford, about 30 minutes from here. Family-owned, quiet this time of morning. We can talk there." At the diner, while Emma and Liam happily devoured pancakes shaped like teddy bears, Ethan explained his connection to her grandfather. "My father worked with Arthur at Midwest Engineering back in the 70s, he said, keeping his voice low. "They were both part of a research division working on alternative energy. That's where Arthur first developed his theories about atmospheric energy conversion." "The journal mentioned a fire," Jessica prompted. Ethan's expression darkened. "That was Westridge's doing. Once they realized what Arthur had created, technology that could essentially provide free energy to everyone, they tried to bury it. My father was injured in that fire. Lost the use of his right hand. Arthur never forgave himself, even though it wasn't his fault. But why did my grandfather keep working on it in secret all these years? Why not go public? He tried, early on. Nobody believed him. The science seemed too revolutionary, and the big energy companies made sure any academic who showed interest suddenly found their funding cut or their reputations questioned." Ethan stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Arthur decided the only way forward was to perfect the technology to a point where it couldn't be denied or suppressed, then release it through carefully chosen channels." "Patterson and Mercer," Jessica said. Ethan nodded. "They're not just any law firm. They specialize in protecting inventors from corporate exploitation. Arthur set up a trust with them years ago, with very specific instructions for how his technology should be patented and licensed." "So what happens now?" Jessica asked. "We get to Lincoln, meet with the attorneys, and follow Arthur's plan." Ethan leaned forward. "Jessica, what your grandfather created could change everything. Clean energy for everyone, at almost no cost. No more fuel poverty. No more climate-changing emissions from power plants. It's worth billions, maybe trillions, but only if it's used the way Arthur intended. And Westridge wants to make sure that never happens," Jessica concluded. "Exactly. They've built their fortune on controlling energy access. Arthur's technology threatens their entire business model." Ethan glanced at Emma and Liam, who were now coloring on their placemats. "He chose you for a reason. He believed you had the courage to see this through." Jessica felt the weight of her grandfather's trust pressing down on her shoulders. She was a single mother, barely keeping her family afloat, now suddenly responsible for technology that could change the world, if she could protect it from people who would stop at nothing to suppress it. "We should get moving," Ethan said, checking his watch. "The attorneys are expecting us at 11. As they prepared to leave, Jessica's phone rang, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Ms. Miller." Richard Westridge's smooth voice sent a chill down her spine. "I see you've decided to leave the property rather abruptly. I'm disappointed we couldn't continue our conversation. How did you get this number?" Jessica demanded. "We have resources, Ms. Miller. Just as we have resources to make things very difficult for a single mother with limited means." His tone remained pleasant, but the threat was unmistakable. Before you make any hasty decisions about your grandfather's hobby projects, I'd like to make you an offer. $5 million for all materials related to his atmospheric energy research. Enough to secure your children's future, buy a comfortable home, never worry about money again. Jessica's hand tightened around the phone. $5 million. It was more money than she could imagine, enough to solve every financial problem she had. All you need to do is meet me at your grandfather's property this afternoon with all the materials you've found, Westridge continued. We'll have papers ready for you to sign, and you'll leave with a certified check. It's a generous offer, Ms. Miller. Far more than these unfinished ideas are worth to anyone else. Jessica looked at her children, then at Ethan, who was watching her with concern. Mr. Westridge, she said finally, my grandfather spent his life protecting his work from people like you. I'm not about to betray that for any amount of money. I understand family loyalty, Ms. Miller, Westridge replied, his voice hardening slightly. But consider the practical reality. You're unemployed, facing eviction, with 2 young children to support. Arthur's misguided idealism left him living as a reclusive farmer when he could have been a wealthy man. Don't make the same mistake. My grandfather wasn't mistaken about you, Jessica said firmly. Goodbye, Mr. Westridge. She ended the call and turned to Ethan. $5 million, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's what they think it's worth to keep it buried. Ethan's expression was grim. Then imagine what it's really worth to the world. As they prepared to continue their journey to Lincoln, Jessica realized that in less than 24 hours, her life had transformed completely. She had come to her grandfather's farm seeking temporary shelter from financial ruin. Instead, she had inherited a legacy that could change the world, and the responsibility to protect it from those who would keep humanity dependent on their energy monopoly. With her children safely buckled in the back seat and her grandfather's life-work secure in her possession, Jessica followed Ethan's truck back onto the highway, heading toward Lincoln and the next chapter in Arthur Miller's remarkable story, now her story too. The Lincoln skyline rose against the winter gray as Jessica followed Ethan's truck into the city. Far from the pastoral quiet of her grandfather's farm, the capital's midday traffic hummed with urban purpose, a world away from the empty fields and hidden workshops where Arthur Miller had concealed his life's greatest achievement. The offices of Patterson and Mercer occupied the top floor of a modest downtown building, its brass directory plaque polished but understated. Unlike the gleaming glass towers of corporate law firms, this place carried the dignified patina of decades serving clients who valued discretion over display. Jessica held Liam on her hip while Emma pressed close to her side, both children wide-eyed at the unfamiliar surroundings. Ethan walked slightly ahead, his farmer's gait seeming out of place on the polished marble floor. Arthur Miller's granddaughter, the receptionist said with a nod of recognition when Jessica gave her name. We've been expecting you. Mr. Patterson will see you immediately. They were led down a hallway lined with framed patents, hundreds of them, representing generations of American innovation. Jessica caught glimpses of familiar devices alongside obscure inventions whose purpose she couldn't begin to guess. Robert Patterson rose from behind his desk as they entered, an elderly man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the deliberate movements of someone who had outlived most of his contemporaries. His handshake was firm, his voice warm with the rounded vowels of rural Nebraska. Ms. Miller, I've been waiting for this meeting for over 15 years, he said. Your grandfather spoke of you often. The children were settled in an adjoining room with books and snacks under the watchful eye of a grandmotherly assistant. Once the door closed behind them, Patterson's demeanor shifted subtly from welcoming to intensely focused. I understand you found Arthur's research, he said without preamble. And that Westridge Energy has made contact. Jessica nodded, placing the external hard drive and USB on Patterson's desk. They offered $5 million this morning. They're watching the farm. $5 million is insulting, Patterson said with unexpected sharpness. They'd pay 10 times that just to bury this technology. He picked up the hard drive carefully. This contains the complete specifications? According to my grandfather, yes, Jessica replied. There are 3 working prototypes hidden at the farm as well. Patterson exchanged glances with Ethan. We should secure those as soon as possible. Westridge won't hesitate to trespass if they believe the property is unoccupied. Arthur had a plan for that too, Ethan said. I've got people I trust watching the place. Former military, friends who owe me favors. They'll make sure nothing leaves without our knowledge. Patterson nodded, seemingly unsurprised that Arthur Miller's contingencies had contingencies. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Diana, please bring in the Miller Trust documents. As they waited, Patterson explained the legal structure Arthur had created. Your grandfather established what we call a humanitarian patent trust. It's designed to protect intellectual property while ensuring it benefits humanity rather than being controlled by corporate interests. A secretary entered with a thick binder, which Patterson opened to reveal hundreds of pages of legal documents. Arthur began setting this up in 1982. After the fire, Patterson continued. He updated it regularly as his work progressed and laws changed. The trust has three primary objectives. First, to secure patent protection for the atmospheric energy converter in every major jurisdiction worldwide. Second, to license the technology through an open-source humanitarian model that prevents monopolization. Third, to ensure you and your children are financially secure as the stewards of his legacy. Jessica's mind reeled at the scope of her grandfather's foresight. He planned all this while living as a simple farmer? Arthur understood that true revolution rarely announces itself with fanfare, Patterson said with a small smile. The trust currently holds approximately $17 million, funds Arthur accumulated through modest investments over decades and channeled through various entities to avoid attention. This money will fund the patent filings, legal defenses, and prototype development. 17 million. Jessica whispered, struggling to reconcile this figure with the man who had lived so frugally. Your grandfather lived simply by choice, not necessity, Patterson explained. He believed ostentatious wealth would attract the wrong kind of attention to his work. The attorney turned several pages in the binder. Under the terms of the trust, you'll receive an annual stipend of $250,000 as the primary trustee, with additional funds for your children's education and health care. The majority of the trust's assets will be used to protect and disseminate the technology according to the humanitarian licensing model Arthur designed. Jessica felt as though she were standing on shifting ground. Just days ago, she had been counting pennies to buy groceries. Now she was discussing millions of dollars and world-changing technology. What happens next? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. We move quickly, Patterson replied. Westridge already knows you found something. Their approach to you means they're desperate to contain this before it goes public. He looked at Ethan. We need the prototypes secured and transported to our testing facility in Omaha. I can handle that, Ethan nodded. Meanwhile, Patterson continued, turning back to Jessica, we need to file the patents immediately. Our team has been prepared for this moment for years. We can have the initial filings complete within 72 hours. He paused. But there's something else we need to discuss, something Arthur insisted would be your decision alone. Patterson withdrew an envelope from the binder and handed it to Jessica. Inside was a letter in her grandfather's handwriting. Jessica, by now Robert has explained the legal structures I've put in place. What he cannot decide is how my work reaches the world. There are two paths before you. The first is caution. We secure the patents, develop the technology gradually through trusted partners, and change the world's energy systems over decades. This path is safer and more controlled. The second is revelation. We publicly demonstrate the technology immediately and release the basic designs to the world under an open-source humanitarian license, making it impossible to suppress. This path is riskier but potentially more transformative. Companies like Westridge will fight us either way, but they cannot fight the entire world at once. The choice between prudence and boldness must be yours. Trust yourself as I have trusted you. Grandpa Arthur. Jessica read the letter twice, feeling the weight of her grandfather's final choice pressing upon her. Patterson and Ethan waited silently, respecting the moment. What would you advise? Jessica finally asked Patterson. The elderly attorney folded his hands. The cautious path offers more control and potentially more financial security for your family. The open-source route would be chaotic. Once released, the technology will spread faster than any legal framework can contain it. That chaos might be exactly what Arthur wanted, Ethan interjected quietly. The energy industry can fight patents and regulations, but they can't fight a million garage inventors building these devices in every country simultaneously. A memory surfaced in Jessica's mind, her grandfather sitting with her on the porch swing, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the fields. Nature doesn't hoard its power, he had told her. It gives it freely. That's why those who sell what should be free are always fighting against the natural order of things. Before Jessica could respond, Patterson's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then looked up with alarm. Westridge has obtained an emergency injunction claiming ownership of Arthur's research based on his employment contract from the 1970s. They've convinced a judge to freeze all potential patent filings related to atmospheric energy conversion technology pending a hearing. How is that possible? Jessica demanded. They can't even know what's in the research. They don't need to, Patterson said grimly. Corporate law gives them broad latitude to claim anything developed by former employees in related fields. It won't ultimately stand, but legal delays are their specialty. They're trying to buy time to locate and seize the prototypes. They're making their move on the farm too, Ethan added, checking his phone. My friends report multiple vehicles approaching from the main road, private security contractors, not Westridge employees. The walls seemed to close in around Jessica. The machinery of corporate power was moving to crush her grandfather's dream before it could take its first breath in the daylight. How long will the injunction delay us? She asked. Months at minimum. Years potentially, Patterson admitted. They'll bury us in motions and hearings while their lobbyists work to change energy regulations to classify new technologies like Arthur's as national security concerns requiring government approval. Jessica looked again at her grandfather's letter, the choice between caution and boldness. In that moment, she understood why Arthur had entrusted this decision to her rather than embedding it in legal documents. Some choices couldn't be made through careful calculation, they required the moral clarity that comes from standing at the crossroads of history. Mr. Patterson, she said, her voice finding new strength, how quickly can we execute the second option my grandfather described? Complete public disclosure? The attorney's eyebrows rose. Immediate disclosure would render the injunction meaningless, they can't suppress information that's already public. But it would also potentially surrender billions in patent licensing that could fund further development and protect your family's interests. My family's interests and humanity's interests are the same, Jessica said, thinking of her children in the next room. A world with free, clean energy is worth more than any amount of money we might make controlling it. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been approval. Arthur said you would choose this path. We've prepared for this possibility. He opened a drawer and removed a slim folder. This contains everything needed for immediate disclosure, technical specifications simplified for public understanding, construction plans for basic prototypes, and video documentation of Arthur's working models. We can upload these to over 50 secure servers worldwide simultaneously, with automatic distribution to scientific journals, engineering forums, and media outlets. How soon? Jessica asked. Within the hour, Patterson replied. Once we press this button, there's no going back. Westridge and every other energy company on the planet will deploy every resource they have against us. Not against us, Jessica corrected. Against everyone who starts building these devices. That's the point. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Westridge's team is at the farm property now. For vehicles, approximately 12 men. They're forcing entry into the workshop. Patterson looked to Jessica. It's your decision. Your grandfather was clear about that. Jessica thought of Arthur Miller, the quiet farmer who had carried this revolutionary secret for decades, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it into the light. She thought of her children's future in a world choked by carbon emissions and energy poverty. She thought of Westridge's $5 million offer to bury her grandfather's gift to humanity. "Release everything," she said firmly. "Right now." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of activity. Patterson's team executed what they called the Sunshine Protocol, Arthur's carefully designed plan for unrestricted global release of his technology. The atmospheric energy converter specifications flooded onto the internet in dozens of languages simultaneously, accompanied by simplified construction guides that would allow anyone with basic technical skills to build working models. Arthur had prepared videos explaining the scientific principles and demonstrating working prototypes. These appeared on video-sharing platforms worldwide, immediately generating millions of views and countless heated debates about their authenticity. "Westridge has seized the prototypes from the farm," Ethan reported grimly as they watched the information spread across the global network. "They're claiming proprietary technology theft." "It doesn't matter now," Patterson said, indicating a screen showing real-time data on the information release. "The designs have been downloaded over 200,000 times already. Engineers in 43 countries have acknowledged receipt and begun verification. The technology is beyond anyone's control now, exactly as Arthur intended." Jessica's phone had been ringing constantly: journalists, government officials, energy company representatives. She had ignored them all, focusing instead on what Patterson called the second phase of Arthur's plan. "Your grandfather knew that releasing the technology wouldn't be enough," the attorney explained as they prepared for a hastily arranged press conference. "People need to understand why it was kept secret for so long, and why it's being released now. They need to connect with the human story behind the invention. That human story, Arthur Miller's decades-long quest to create truly free energy for humanity, and the forces that had tried to suppress it, was about to become Jessica's responsibility to tell." The press conference was held in Patterson and Mercer's largest conference room. News organizations from around the world connected virtually, while local media crowded the physical space. Jessica stood behind a podium, Ethan supportively at her side, as Patterson introduced her as the inheritor of what may be the most important technological breakthrough of the century. Looking out at the sea of cameras and expectant faces, Jessica felt a moment of terror. She was a furniture maker, not a public speaker. But then she thought of her grandfather, how his quiet determination had carried this dream through decades of secrecy and sacrifice. She could carry it a little further. "My name is Jessica Miller," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "3 days ago, I was a struggling single mother facing eviction. Today, I'm here to tell you about my grandfather, Arthur Miller, and why he spent 50 years developing a technology that could provide clean, free energy to every person on this planet." She told Arthur's story simply and directly: his early discoveries, the attempts by energy companies to suppress his work, the fire that nearly killed him, and his decision to continue in secret until the technology was perfected. "My grandfather lived as a simple farmer, but he was working to solve humanity's greatest challenge: how to meet our energy needs without destroying our planet," Jessica explained. "He completed that work shortly before his death, and left me with a choice: to control this technology or to share it freely with the world." A reporter interrupted: "Ms. Miller, Westridge Energy has issued a statement claiming your grandfather's work was developed while he was their employee and legally belongs to them. They're seeking billions in damages for intellectual property theft." Jessica had anticipated this question. "My grandfather left Westridge's employment in 1978. He developed this technology independently over the following 45 years. But more importantly, he believed that the power of the atmosphere, like the power of the sun, belongs to all humanity, not to corporations seeking to profit from its control." "Aren't you concerned about the economic disruption this technology could cause?" another journalist asked. "Entire industries could collapse if energy becomes virtually free." "My grandfather was concerned about the millions who die each year from energy poverty and pollution," Jessica replied. "He was concerned about a planet being destroyed by carbon emissions. Those concerns outweigh the profit margins of fossil fuel companies." As the press conference continued, Patterson quietly showed Jessica his tablet, where real-time data tracked the spread of Arthur's technology. Engineers and scientists worldwide were already replicating his results. Within hours, the first independent validations appeared, confirming that the atmospheric energy converter worked exactly as described. By evening, videos of homemade prototypes were appearing online from workshops and garages around the world. The scientific community was in uproar, with some dismissing the technology as impossible while others hailed it as revolutionary. Energy company stocks had begun to plummet as investors recognized the potential disruption. "It's happening even faster than Arthur predicted," Patterson marveled as they watched the cascade of reactions. "The technological literacy of the average person is much higher than when he began this work. People can understand and implement these designs without industrial support." As night fell, Jessica finally had a moment alone with her children in the hotel suite Patterson had arranged. Emma and Liam were exhausted but excited by the day's adventures, too young to understand the significance of what was unfolding around them. "Are we going back to Grandpa's farm?" Emma asked as Jessica tucked her into bed. "Not right away, sweetheart," Jessica replied. "We need to stay in the city for a little while." "I like the farm," Emma said sleepily. "It smelled like Grandpa." Jessica smiled, blinking back sudden tears. "Yes, it did." After the children were asleep, Jessica stood at the window, looking out over the lights of Lincoln. Her phone continued to buzz with calls and messages, but she let them go unanswered for now. She needed this moment of quiet to process the transformation of her life. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Ethan, looking tired but resolute. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, "but there's something you should see." He showed her his tablet, which displayed a live news feed. The headline read, "Miller Farm surrounded by supporters, AS Energy Company's attempt seizure." The video showed dozens of pickup trucks and cars parked along the road to her grandfather's property. Local farmers, students, and environmental activists had formed a human chain, preventing Westridge's security contractors from removing equipment from the farm. Word spread about what Westridge was doing, Ethan explained. "People around here respected Arthur. They're not about to let some corporation ransack his home." Jessica watched in amazement as more vehicles arrived, neighbors bringing food and coffee to the growing crowd of supporters. The local sheriff was visible, talking calmly with the protest organizers while keeping Westridge's contractors at a distance. "Your grandfather helped a lot of people over the years," Ethan said quietly. "Loans during hard times, advice on equipment repairs, quiet support when banks were foreclosing. They haven't forgotten." For the first time since discovering her inheritance, Jessica felt tears spill freely down her cheeks, not from fear or stress, but from the realization that her grandfather's legacy extended far beyond his invention. Arthur Miller had understood that true wealth wasn't measured in patents or bank accounts, but in the lives he touched and the community he helped build. "Patterson says we can file for an emergency counter-injunction tomorrow," Ethan continued. "Force Westridge's people off the property until ownership of the research is legally settled." Jessica nodded, wiping her eyes. "We need to protect the farm. Not just for the prototypes, but because it's where this all began. People should be able to see where Arthur worked, understand how one person with determination can change the world." "A museum?" Ethan suggested. "Something like that," Jessica agreed. "A place where people can learn about the technology, but also about the man who created it, who chose to live simply so others could simply live." The next morning brought news that engineers in 12 countries had successfully built working atmospheric energy converters based on Arthur's designs. Videos showed lights powered by the devices illuminating homes from Kenya to Kazakhstan. The technology was proliferating faster than anyone could track, each new implementation improving on the last as the global community of innovators embraced Arthur's gift. Westridge Energy's stock had fallen 60% overnight. Their CEO issued a statement announcing strategic reorganization to adapt to emerging energy paradigms while simultaneously filing lawsuits against Jessica, Patterson and Mercer, and anyone publishing Arthur's designs. "The legal threats are meaningless now," Patterson explained during their morning briefing. "They're trying to close the barn door after the horses have not only escaped but have started their own transportation company." The attorney slid a document across the table to Jessica. This just arrived from the Justice Department. They're requesting your cooperation with a national security review of the technology. Jessica scanned the official letterhead with concern. Are they trying to classify the technology? Stop its spread? Patterson shook his head. Quite the opposite. They want to ensure it's implemented safely and that critical infrastructure can be adapted accordingly. Several senators are already drafting legislation to protect atmospheric energy access as a public right. That's not what I expected, Jessica admitted. Arthur did, Patterson replied with a small smile. Page 342 of his contingency plans addresses this exact scenario. He predicted that once the technology was widely distributed, governments would prefer to regulate it rather than fight a losing battle to control it. Jessica marveled again at her grandfather's foresight, his ability to see not just the technical challenges of his invention but the human and political dimensions of its impact. That afternoon, Jessica returned to the farm, escorted by state police who kept the media at a respectful distance. The crowd of supporters parted to let her through, many reaching out to shake her hand or share stories of how Arthur had touched their lives. Westridge's security contractors had withdrawn following the counter-injunction, leaving the property quiet once again. The workshop door stood open, showing signs of forced entry, but the farm itself remained largely as she had left it, a humble monument to a man whose vision had stretched far beyond its weathered fences. Jessica walked slowly through the workshop, trailing her fingers over the workbenches where her grandfather had patiently built the devices that would change the world. Though the prototypes were gone, seized by Westridge in their desperate attempt to contain what could not be contained, the spirit of innovation that had filled this space for decades remained palpable. She descended the hidden stairs to the underground laboratory, which Westridge's people had partially dismantled in their haste to understand and control Arthur's work. Technical equipment had been removed, documents seized, but they had missed the most important thing, a small metal box embedded in the concrete floor beneath a workbench, secured with the same distinctive lock as the box Jessica had found on her first day. Using the brass key she still carried, Jessica opened it to find a leather-bound journal and a handwritten note addressed to her. Jessica, if you're reading this, you've made the choice I hoped you would. The technology is now in the world's hands, beyond the reach of those who would control it. This final journal contains something different, not technical specifications or design improvements, but my reflections on why this journey mattered and what I hope it will mean for generations to come. It's not for the world, it's for you and your children, and their children after them. Some legacies aren't measured in patents or profits, but in the quiet moments when we choose to serve something greater than ourselves. I'm proud of you, granddaughter. Jessica clutched the journal to her chest, feeling closer to her grandfather in that moment than she had since his death. Outside, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the farm that had sheltered not just a family, but a revolution. In the months that followed, the world began to transform in ways both dramatic and subtle. The first industrial-scale atmospheric energy converters were constructed in developing nations, bringing power to communities that had never had reliable electricity. Massive engineering projects were launched to adapt existing infrastructure to the new energy paradigm. Westridge Energy eventually dropped its lawsuits and announced a strategic pivot to become a manufacturer of atmospheric converter components, a humbling concession that nevertheless allowed the company to survive in the new reality. True to her word, Jessica established the Arthur Miller Innovation Center at the farm, where visitors could learn about the technology's development and the man behind it. The workshop was preserved exactly as Arthur had kept it, while the underground laboratory became a classroom where students from around the world could learn the principles of atmospheric energy conversion. Jessica and her children remained at the farm, though the house had been renovated and expanded with the trust funds. Emma and Liam attended the local school, growing up with a profound understanding of their great-grandfather's legacy and the responsibility it entailed. Ethan Calloway became the center's first director of education, his engineering background and farming roots making him the perfect bridge between Arthur's world and the technological revolution his invention had sparked. His friendship with Jessica deepened over shared work and common purpose, eventually blossoming into something neither had expected to find amid the upheaval of that transformative winter. One evening in late spring, as the first crops were pushing through the soil of surrounding farms, Jessica sat on the porch swing that had been her grandfather's favorite spot. Arthur's final journal lay open in her lap, turned to an entry from his last autumn. The land teaches us that nothing valuable comes without patience. I've watched 50 harvests from this porch, each one a reminder that we plant seeds not just for ourselves, but for those who will come after us. Some seeds take longer to grow than others. This energy harvester is the seed I've tended longest, decade after decade of careful cultivation, protecting it from those who would trample it before it could take root. Now it's nearly ready, and soon it will be Jessica's turn to decide when and how to bring in this harvest. I trust her to know when the season is right. Jessica closed the journal and looked out across the greening fields. The land had been in her family for generations, but never had it felt more alive with possibility than it did now. The old farmhouse and workshop that had sheltered her grandfather's quiet revolution had become the birthplace of a new world, one where energy flowed as freely as the prairie wind. In the distance, the atmospheric energy converter that powered the farm and the Innovation Center hummed almost imperceptibly, Arthur Miller's final gift, turning the endless cycle of atmospheric pressure into light and warmth for generations yet to come. Some legacies were measured in dollars and cents, in patents and corporate holdings. But others, Jessica now understood, were measured in the light that shines when one person's courage opens the door to possibility for all who follow. Her grandfather had chosen that second, harder path, and now it was her privilege to walk it forward into the future he had helped create. 5 years passed, each season writing its own chapter in the story of the Miller farm. Spring rains nourished fields that now served a different purpose, summer sun gilded the solar panels that supplemented the atmospheric converters, autumn winds carried the voices of visitors who came to learn about the quiet revolution that had begun in this unassuming place, and winter snows blanketed the land in temporary peace before the cycle began again. The Arthur Miller Innovation Center had grown beyond Jessica's initial vision. What had started as a modest museum had evolved into an international hub for sustainable technology education. The old barn had been carefully preserved as the historical heart of the complex, while modern facilities had risen from adjacent fields, glass and reclaimed timber structures that housed classrooms, research spaces, and demonstration areas where Arthur's invention continued to evolve through global collaboration. On this particular morning, the 5th anniversary of the technology's public release, Jessica stood at the edge of the eastern field, watching the sun climb above the horizon. The air carried the scent of fresh-turned earth from neighboring farms, where the spring planting was underway. 5 growing seasons had passed since the world changed, each one a testament to the resilience of rural communities adapting to profound transformation. "There you are," called a familiar voice. Ethan approached along the fence line, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "Thought you might need this." Jessica accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the years, from allies in a crisis to partners in building Arthur's legacy, and finally to a family bound by more than just shared purpose. Ethan's steady presence had become as essential to her life as the land beneath her feet. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, leaning against the fence beside her. "Just wanted to watch the sunrise," Jessica replied. 5 years ago today, we were sitting in Patterson's office, pushing that button. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Arthur would be proud of what you've built here." "What we've built," Jessica corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this without you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. A black SUV, not unlike the one that had once brought Westridge executives to intimidate a desperate single mother, made its way up the long drive toward the Innovation Center. "Right on time," Ethan noted, checking his watch. Unlike 5 years ago, this vehicle's arrival carried no threat. Jessica recognized it as belonging to Dr. Elaine Foster, once Westridge Energy's chief research scientist, now the director of the International Atmospheric Energy Commission. The woman who had once searched Arthur's workshop for his secrets now worked to ensure his technology was implemented safely worldwide. "Never thought I'd see her driving herself to meetings," Jessica remarked as they walked toward the center to greet their visitor. "Last time she was in Washington, she had a full security detail." "The benefits of semi-retirement," Ethan replied. "Though I doubt she'll ever fully step away from the commission." Dr. Foster emerged from her vehicle looking notably different from the corporate scientist Jessica had first encountered. The sharp business attire had given way to more casual clothing, and the rigid posture had softened. 5 years of guiding the world through an energy revolution had changed her, just as it had changed them all. "Jessica, Ethan," she greeted them with genuine warmth. "It's good to see you both." They led her toward the conference room where representatives from 17 countries would soon gather via video link for the anniversary summit. The early morning timing accommodated participants across global time zones, from engineers in Tokyo to implementation specialists in Lagos. "I brought something I thought you might want to see before the meeting," Dr. Foster said, removing a tablet from her bag. "The latest global implementation statistics." The screen displayed a map illuminated with thousands of points of light, each representing an atmospheric energy installation. What had begun with Arthur Miller's prototypes had multiplied into a global network providing clean power to over 2 billion people. The densest clusters appeared not in wealthy nations, but in regions that had previously suffered the most severe energy poverty. 97 countries now classify atmospheric energy access as a basic human right, Dr. Foster explained. Even the holdouts are beginning to recognize the inevitable. Jessica studied the map, remembering her grandfather's words from his final journal: "Energy should flow as freely as air itself, constrained only by the needs of safety, never by the demands of profit." "And Westridge?" she asked, though she already knew much of the answer. Dr. Foster's expression turned contemplative. "The old company effectively doesn't exist anymore." After Richard stepped down, the board approved the restructuring plan. They're now Westridge Atmospheric Systems, focused entirely on converter technology implementation and grid adaptation. Their patent disputes are settled, their fossil fuel assets divested. It had been a remarkable transformation, from energy monopolist to technology implementer. Not a conversion born of altruism, but of pragmatic recognition that fighting the inevitable would lead only to obsolescence. "And Richard?" Jessica asked, curious about the man who had once offered her millions to bury her grandfather's work. "Still bitter," Dr. Foster replied frankly. "Still believes Arthur's technology should have been developed responsibly, meaning slowly and under corporate control." She shook her head. He never understood that some genies aren't meant to stay in bottles. The conference room gradually filled as center staff prepared for the summit. Emma and Liam, now 11 and 9, appeared with their school tablets, eager to present their atmospheric energy projects to the international audience. Jessica watched her children with quiet pride, marveling at their intuitive understanding of concepts that had once been revolutionary. "Mom, is it true that great-grandpa started working on converters when he was my age?" Emma asked, her copper hair, so like Jessica's own, caught in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "Not exactly," Jessica replied. "But he told me once that he first became fascinated with energy when he was about 11. His family's farm got electricity for the first time, and he couldn't stop asking questions about how it worked and why it cost so much." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "So he spent his whole life trying to make it better." "In his own way," Jessica agreed. "Not everyone understood what he was doing, or why it mattered so much to him." "But you did," Emma said with absolute certainty. Jessica smiled, touched by her daughter's faith. The truth was more complicated. She had discovered her grandfather's legacy almost by accident, driven by desperate circumstances rather than special insight. But perhaps Arthur had known that desperation would make her bold enough to choose revelation over caution when the moment came. The summit began with reports from implementation teams around the world. Engineers in India described rural electrification projects reaching villages that had never had reliable power. Australian representatives outlined plans to decommission their last coal-fired plant by year's end. African coalition members reported on community-based manufacturing programs teaching local populations to build and maintain their own converters. As Jessica listened to these updates, she found herself reflecting on how thoroughly Arthur's invention had transformed the global landscape. Wars over oil had ceased as petroleum's strategic value plummeted. Carbon emissions had dropped dramatically as nations abandoned fossil fuels not from obligation but economic self-interest. Energy poverty, once affecting nearly 1 billion people worldwide, was on track for elimination within another decade. Yet the most profound changes had occurred not in global statistics but in individual lives. Families in remote villages could now refrigerate medicines and food. Children studied under reliable light rather than dangerous kerosene lamps. Hospitals operated life-saving equipment without fear of power failures. When it came time for Jessica to address the gathering, she spoke not as the inheritor of revolutionary technology, but as the granddaughter of a farmer who had seen a better way. 5 years ago today, my grandfather's work emerged from secrecy into the light, she began. Arthur Miller didn't live to see how his invention would transform our world, but he understood something essential about legacy, that our most valuable contributions often grow beyond our imagination once we have the courage to release them. She gestured toward Emma and Liam, who sat attentively with the quiet pride of children who had grown up in the shadow of an extraordinary story. The work we continue today isn't just about technology, but about the world we choose to create for generations who will inherit it. Arthur believed that by removing energy scarcity from the equation of human progress, we could unlock solutions to challenges far beyond the power grid. As the summit continued, Jessica excused herself briefly. She walked the familiar path to the old workshop, now preserved as the historical heart of the center. Unlike the modern facilities that surrounded it, this space remained much as Arthur had left it, workbenches worn smooth by decades of use, tools hanging in their appointed places, the trapdoor to the hidden laboratory now permanently open as part of the exhibition. Jessica descended the stairs to the underground space where her grandfather had perfected his invention in secret. Most of the equipment had been relocated to active research areas, leaving this room as a memorial to Arthur's solitary work. A single atmospheric converter, one of his early prototypes, recovered from Westridge during the legal settlement, hummed quietly in the corner, powering the exhibit lighting. On the central workbench lay her grandfather's final journal, opened under protective glass to the entry he had written the day he completed his work. Today I tested the Mark VII converter at full capacity for the first time. After 50 years of work, the results exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The system achieved 98.7% efficiency in converting atmospheric pressure differential into usable electricity, with minimal materials and nearly zero maintenance requirements. The age of artificial energy scarcity can end, if humanity chooses to embrace rather than fear abundance. I am 78 years old. My hands shake when I hold my tools, and my eyes fail me in the dim light of this workshop. I will not live to see this technology transform the world as I believe it can. But I have prepared everything for Jessica. She has her mother's courage and her father's practical mind, but something else entirely her own, an instinctive understanding of when to stand firm and when to let go. She will know what to do when the time comes. Jessica touched the glass gently, feeling a familiar ache of gratitude mixed with loss. Arthur had seen something in her that she hadn't recognized in herself until circumstances forced her to make the hardest choice of her life. Ms. Miller? Jessica turned to find a young woman at the bottom of the stairs, one of the international students who had come to study atmospheric energy systems at the center. I'm sorry to disturb you, the student continued, but there's someone here to see you. He says he's from Westridge, but he doesn't have an appointment. Jessica followed her back to the main building, curious. The formal relationships with Westridge Atmospheric Systems were handled through legal and research channels. Unexpected visitors were unusual. In the reception area stood an elderly man she didn't recognize, leaning on a cane and looking somewhat out of place among the students and researchers who filled the center. His tailored coat and polished shoes spoke of corporate prosperity, but his eyes held a vulnerability that corporate power rarely permitted. Ms. Miller, he said, extending his hand. I'm William Westridge. Jessica hesitated only momentarily before shaking his hand. The founder of Westridge Energy? I thought you had retired decades ago. I did, he confirmed. My son Richard took over in the 90s. I'm sure you've met him under less than ideal circumstances. Jessica nodded, studying the man more carefully. You're in the photograph with my grandfather. From 1978. William Westridge's expression softened. You found that? Yes, that was taken at the Midwest Engineering Laboratory. Arthur had just demonstrated his first atmospheric pressure concept. His voice carried a note of what might have been regret. He was brilliant, ahead of his time in ways none of us fully understood. "Why are you here, Mr. Westridge?" Jessica asked directly. The elderly man gestured toward a nearby bench. "May we sit? My joints aren't what they once were." Once seated, William Westridge removed an envelope from his coat pocket. "I've come to deliver this personally. It's been in my possession for 45 years, far too long." Jessica accepted the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a yellow document, a patent application dated 1978, bearing her grandfather's name and signature. The title read Method and Apparatus for Harvesting Electrical Energy from Atmospheric Pressure Differential. "Arthur filed this before the dispute with Westridge Energy," William explained. "When our company moved to acquire his research, this application was suppressed. It never reached the patent office." Jessica looked up sharply. "You stole his patent application?" "I made a decision I've regretted ever since," the old man admitted. "Our analysts had determined that if Arthur's technology worked as projected, it would eventually render traditional energy production obsolete. As CEO, I was responsible for protecting shareholder interests." "At the expense of humanity's interests," Jessica observed. William Westridge nodded slowly. "That's what Arthur said, the last time we spoke. He accused me of choosing quarterly profits over my grandchildren's future." He looked around at the center, with its bustling activity and sense of purpose. "He was right, of course. I just couldn't see it then. Why bring this to me now?" Jessica asked. "The patent would have expired decades ago, even if it had been granted." "Not for legal reasons," William replied. "For historical ones. This document belongs in your grandfather's archive, proof that he tried to share his discovery through proper channels before circumstances forced him underground." He paused. "And perhaps selfishly, I wanted you to know that not everyone at Westridge was blind to the value of Arthur's work. Some of us were simply constrained by the systems we had helped create." Jessica considered the document, a paper relic from the carbon age her grandfather's invention was helping to end. "Thank you for bringing this. It does belong in the archive." As William Westridge prepared to leave, he paused to watch a group of students demonstrating miniaturized converters they had built as part of their studies. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "Not just of the technology, but of how you've implemented it, openly, collaboratively." "He always said the atmosphere belongs to everyone," Jessica replied. "It made sense that energy harvested from it should be shared the same way." After William Westridge departed, Jessica found Ethan supervising preparations for the afternoon's public anniversary celebration. Local families would soon arrive for demonstrations, workshops, and the community meal that had become an annual tradition. "Everything all right?" Ethan asked, noting her pensive expression. Jessica showed him the patent application. "William Westridge just returned this in person. The original application my grandfather filed before the dispute." Ethan examined the document with interest. "So even back then, Arthur tried to do things through official channels before going underground." "He always gave the system a chance to work before working around it," Jessica agreed. "I think that's why he left me the choice about how to release the technology. He wanted me to decide whether the system had changed enough to trust it." By mid-afternoon, the center grounds were filled with visitors. Families from surrounding farms mingled with international researchers and local officials. Children raced between demonstration booths where they could build simple converters from household materials. The atmosphere hummed with the energy of ideas freely shared. Jessica found herself drawn back to the old farmhouse, still her family's home despite the transformation of the surrounding property. She climbed the stairs to the attic, where boxes of her grandfather's personal effects remained largely untouched. Among them was a wooden crate containing photographs and mementos from Arthur's early years. A faded image caught her attention, Arthur as a young man, standing proudly beside his father in front of a newly electrified farmhouse. The year 1953 was penciled on the back, along with the words "Finally got power to the back 40." Jessica smiled at the irony. Her grandfather's journey had begun with the arrival of electrical power and ended with his invention making that same power freely available to all. The circle had closed, the legacy complete. As she returned to the anniversary celebration, Jessica paused on the porch where Arthur had spent countless evenings watching the sun set over his fields. The land stretched before her, no longer just a farm, but not quite something else entirely. It remained what it had always been, a place where one person's vision could take root and grow into something that nourished generations. Emma and Liam waved from across the yard, eager to show her their latest project. Jessica watched her children, Arthur's great-grandchildren, move confidently among the visitors, explaining atmospheric energy principles as naturally as other farm kids might discuss rainfall or soil conditions. Ethan joined her on the porch, slipping his arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about cycles," Jessica replied. "How things end where they begin, but different." The farm that had once been a hiding place for revolutionary technology now stood proudly as its birthplace. The workshop where Arthur had labored in secrecy now welcomed students from around the world. The atmospheric pressure that had always surrounded humanity, unnoticed and unharnessed, now powered lights, heated homes, and drove the gentle revolution that continued to unfold across the globe. As evening approached, the community gathered on the lawn for the traditional anniversary meal, tables laden with dishes prepared by local families, many now powered by the very technology they had come to celebrate. Jessica stood to offer the customary welcome, looking out over the faces of neighbors, researchers, and visitors united by something that transcended the technology itself, a shared vision of abundance rather than scarcity. "My grandfather used to say that the most valuable harvest isn't what we take from the land, but what we learn from it," she began. "The land teaches patience, respect for natural cycles, and the understanding that true wealth comes from working with nature's rhythms rather than against them." She gestured toward the atmospheric converters that dotted the property, some architectural showpieces, others deliberately humble working models. "5 years ago, we began a harvest Arthur Miller spent his lifetime cultivating, energy that flows as freely as the air itself. Today, we continue that harvest not just through technology, but through education, collaboration, and the shared belief that our greatest legacy lies in what we freely give, not what we possess." As the celebration continued into the evening, lights powered by Arthur's invention illuminated the gathering. Children played in the twilight, researchers discussed refinements with local farmers, and music filled the air where once only the sound of Arthur's solitary work had echoed across the fields. Later, when the guests had departed and the center staff had completed their cleanup, Jessica walked once more to the eastern field. The moon rose full and bright over land that had witnessed generations of struggle, sacrifice, and now, transformation. She thought of her grandfather's final journal entry, his certainty that she would know what to do when the time came. He had trusted her with his life's work, believing that she would choose revelation over caution when the moment demanded courage. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. Jessica closed her eyes and listened to the land that had sheltered her family's greatest secret until the world was ready to receive it. Some legacies were measured in patents and profits. Others, like Arthur Miller's, were measured in light spreading across continents, in children studying after dark, in hospitals running without interruption, in the quiet hum of possibility. The Miller farm had completed its transformation from hiding place to beacon, just as Jessica herself had journeyed from desperate mother to reluctant revolutionary to steward of a global movement. The soil beneath her feet remembered it all, the fear, the discovery, the moment of decision, and finally, the harvest that would continue long after her own story had ended. As she turned back toward the lights of home, Jessica felt the weight of her grandfather's journal in her pocket, his final gift, meant for her alone. Not the technical specifications that had changed the world, but the wisdom of a man who had understood that true revolution begins with a single choice to serve something larger than oneself. The greatest legacy, Arthur had written, isn't what we build but what we set free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.